On the day I paid off my mortgage, I got a video of my sibling burning the deed in the fireplace, saying, "Funny how you thought you'd actually own something in this family." I was 32, sitting in my cramped apartment, staring at my phone screen in disbelief. My brother Griffin stood in our childhood home, the one I'd paid for, watching my deed curl into ash. Behind him, my father sipped scotch and smiled like he'd just won something. For 15 years, I'd been the family ATM. It started when I was 17 and got my first real job. Dad pulled me aside at dinner. "Your mother needs surgery. Insurance won't cover it." I handed over my entire paycheck. 3 months later, I found out she'd never needed surgery. The money went toward Griffin's semester abroad, but I kept giving. Because that's what you do for family, right? When Dad's business failed, I refinanced my car to cover his debts. When Griffin got his girlfriend pregnant at 23, I paid for the baby's first year of expenses. When Mom wanted to renovate the kitchen, I worked double shifts for 6 months. And the house. That goddamn house. Dad called me 2 years ago. Voice breaking. "We're losing it. The bank's foreclosing. Your mother's childhood home." He sent me the mortgage statements, $847,000 remaining. Every month for 24 months, I wired $4,500. I ate ramen, canceled my gym membership, stopped dating because I couldn't afford dinner out. My friends thought I was antisocial. I was just broke and exhausted, running on fumes and obligation. Last month, I made the final payment. I requested they transfer the deed to my name as we'd agreed. After all, I'd paid every single cent while they lived there rent-free. Dad laughed when I asked. That's not how families work. When I threatened legal action, Griffin sent the video. My deed, the one with my name freshly printed, burning while they celebrated. The caption, "Thanks for the house, sis. Dad's putting it in my name tomorrow." I sat there, my savings account showing $143. I'd sacrificed everything, my 20s, my relationships, my future, all for people who saw me as a resource to extract. That's when I noticed something in the video's background. On the mantle, partially visible, was a framed photo. I zoomed in. It showed Griffin, Dad, and a woman I didn't recognize at what looked like a lawyer's office. The date stamp, 3 days after I'd made my first house payment. They'd planned this from the beginning. My hands were shaking as I opened my laptop and started searching through old emails. That's when I found Dad's correspondence with the mortgage company from 18 months ago. The house had never been in foreclosure. He'd refinanced it, taken out $200,000 in equity, and pocketed the cash. My phone buzzed. A text from Griffin. "Don't even think about suing. Dad's lawyer says you made gifts, not loans. Nothing in writing means you've got nothing." He was right. I had no documentation. Every transfer was labeled family assistance. I'd trusted them completely, like an idiot. I spent that night combing through 2 years of bank statements, text messages, and emails. Then I found it. A single email where Dad had written, "Once Delilah pays off the mortgage, we'll transfer it to Griffin as planned." It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, I filed a police report for fraud. The detective was skeptical until I showed him the video of them burning legal documents. His expression changed immediately. "That's destruction of property you paid for," he said. "Possibly wire fraud if they knowingly misrepresented the situation." 3 days later, I got a call from a blocked number. It was my Uncle Terrence, Dad's brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years. "I need to meet you. Today. There's something about that house you don't know. What could possibly—" "Your grandmother's will. I have the original copy. The one they told everyone was lost in a fire." We met at a diner 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning. My uncle looked older than I remembered, grayer, more tired. He slid a manila envelope across the table before I even sat down. "Open it," he said. Inside was a yellowed document, edges brittle with age. My grandmother's last will and testament, dated 3 months before she died. I scanned the pages, my hands beginning to shake. The house I'd just paid $108,000 for over 2 years, had never belonged to my parents. According to the will, my grandmother had left it to me, specifically to me, with a trust fund of $340,000 attached for maintenance and property taxes. The document was crystal clear. "To my granddaughter Delilah, who has always carried my spirit of independence." "I don't understand," I whispered. "Dad said, your father forged a second will," my uncle said quietly. 6 months after Mom died. I was there when he had it notarized by a friend. I was young, stupid. He convinced me Mom would have wanted him to have control, that you were too young to handle that kind of responsibility. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "You knew? All these years, you knew? I thought he'd do right by you eventually, that he'd tell you the truth when you were older." His voice cracked. "But then I saw what he was doing, how he kept bleeding you dry. I couldn't stay silent anymore." "Why now? Why wait until after I've given them everything?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread, messages between him and my father from 3 days ago. "Dad, Griffin moves in next week. Finally got rid of Delilah's claim. My uncle, she paid for that house. You can't do this. Dad, watch me. She was stupid enough to not get anything in writing. Nothing she can do about it now." My uncle, "I still have Mom's real will. Dad, you wouldn't dare. I'll tell everyone what you did in '98. Your career would be over." "What happened in '98? I asked. "Nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. But your father has always been skilled at manufacturing evidence and spreading rumors. He's destroyed 3 of my business partnerships with lies." He looked at me with watery eyes. "But I'm dying, Delilah. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I've got maybe 6 months. He can't hurt me anymore, and I won't let him keep hurting you. I stared at the will, my mind racing through calculations. If my grandmother had left me the house 15 years ago, then my parents had been living in my property. They'd taken out mortgages against my house. They'd pocketed my money while pretending to save their home. Every dollar I'd sent them was payment on a mortgage they'd fraudulently created against property that was legally mine. There's more, my uncle said, sliding another document across the table. The trust fund. Your father cleaned it out 12 years ago. Told the bank he was acting as trustee for a minor. By the time you turned 18, it was empty. He bought his Porsche with that money. The Porsche. The one he'd called his mid-life reward. The one he'd driven to my college graduation, where he'd complained that I'd chosen a state school instead of reaching for something better. I'd paid for that car, with my inheritance, while working 2 jobs to afford textbooks. Does Mom know? I asked. My uncle's face darkened. Your mother helped forge the second will. She was the witness signature. Of course she was. All those times she'd pulled me aside, told me how much they appreciated my help, how family was everything. She'd known. They both knew. I've already sent copies of the original will to 3 attorneys, my uncle said. It's filed with the county clerk's office as an amendment to the probate case. I backdated the filing to show it was received 2 weeks ago, before you made your last payment. That's not legal. Neither is forging a will and stealing a trust fund. Your father taught me that rules are just suggestions when you have the right connections. He smiled grimly. But I also have something he doesn't. A conscience. And 6 months left to make things right. I looked at the documents spread across the table. Evidence of 15 years of lies. Proof that everything I'd been told about family loyalty was manipulation. That every sacrifice I'd made was built on fraud. What do I do now? I asked. You fight back, my uncle said. And I'll testify to everything. Every conversation, every lie, every cent they stole. The attorney my uncle recommended was a woman named Vivian Cross. Her office occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in sharp, precise handwriting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of family fraud I've seen in 20 years of practice, she said. And I've seen some shit. Can we win? Win? She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. We're not just going to win. We're going to eviscerate them. But I need to know something first. How far are you willing to go? What do you mean? Your parents will face criminal charges. Wire fraud, forgery, theft. They'll likely serve prison time. Your brother could be charged as an accessory if we can prove he knew about the fraud. She looked at me steadily. This will destroy your family. There's no reconciliation after this. No going back. I thought about Griffin's smug video, Dad's smile as my deed burned, Mom's fake tears every time she needed something, 15 years of being treated like a human credit card. There's nothing to go back to, I said. Vivian smiled. Then let's get started. The first step was filing an emergency motion to prevent the transfer of the house to Griffin. Vivian argued that the property was subject to an active probate dispute and couldn't be transferred until the matter was resolved. The judge granted a temporary restraining order within 48 hours. Dad's phone call came 10 minutes after he was served. What the hell do you think you're doing? He screamed. I put him on speaker so Vivian could hear. Protecting my inheritance, I said calmly. Your inheritance? I don't know what lies Terrence has been feeding you, but that house belongs to this family. You can't just... I have the original will, Dad. The one Grandma actually signed. The one you and Mom forged over. Silence. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I also have the trust fund statements. The ones showing you drained $340,000 that was meant for me. And I have your emails planning to steal my house. Those are private communications, which I'll be turning over to the district attorney, along with evidence of wire fraud, forgery, and destruction of property. More silence. Then, you ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me, I laughed. And even I was surprised by how bitter it sounded. You mean letting me pay your mortgage? Stealing my inheritance? Treating me like an ATM machine for 15 years? We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. That's called being a parent. It's not an investment that I'm required to pay back with interest for the rest of my life. If you go through with this, you're dead to us. Do you understand? Dead. Good, I said. Because you've been dead to me since I watched you burn my deed. I hung up. Vivian was grinning. Please tell me you recorded that. Every word. Perfect. His attorney will claim everything was a misunderstanding, that you misinterpreted their intentions. But that conversation shows consciousness of guilt. He didn't deny anything. He just threatened you. Over the next 2 weeks, we built the case. My uncle provided his testimony in a video deposition, knowing he might not live to see trial. He detailed the will forgery, the trust fund theft, the years of manipulation. He produced text messages, emails, even a recording of my father bragging about keeping Delilah in line at a family function. The detective assigned to my fraud case was a quiet man named Chen, who seemed genuinely disturbed by what he uncovered. He'd started digging into my father's finances and found a pattern of exploitation going back decades. My grandmother's trust fund was just the beginning. Your father has been running investment scams through his business, Chen told me during one of our meetings. Small amounts from multiple people. Promises of 15% returns that never materialize. He'd blame market conditions, convince them to leave the money invested, then eventually people would just write it off rather than admit they'd been conned. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, around 2.3 million over 10 years. I felt sick. My father wasn't just a liar. He was a career criminal. Why didn't anyone report him? Some did. But your father is very good at selecting vulnerable targets. Elderly people, recent immigrants with limited English, people who don't understand the legal system. Chen closed his file. Your case gave us the probable cause we needed to get a warrant. We've been trying to build something on him for 3 years. So I'm not the only person he's done this to. Not even close. But you might be the first one who can take him down. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late September. I wore a navy suit that I'd bought specifically for job interviews I'd never been able to attend, because I was working 3 jobs to fund my family's lifestyle. Vivian met me outside the courtroom. They're going to try to intimidate you, she warned. Your father will cry. Your mother will make a scene. Griffin will probably glare at you the entire time. Don't engage, don't react, just tell the truth. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. My parents sat at the defense table with their attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who probably cost more per hour than I made in a week. Griffin sat behind them, and true to Vivian's prediction, he stared at me with unconcealed hatred. Mom was already crying. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the preliminary motions before looking up. This is a hearing to determine if probable cause exists to believe that the defendants committed fraud, forgery, and theft. Ms. Cross, call your first witness. My uncle shuffled to the stand. He'd lost weight since I'd seen him at the diner. His skin had a gray cast that made my chest tight, but his voice was steady as he swore to tell the truth. Vivian walked him through the will forgery, how my father had pressured him to stay silent, how he'd watched my grandmother's wishes get ignored for 15 years. When she played the video deposition where he detailed finding the forged will in my father's desk, Mom's crying got louder. Order, the judge said sharply. During cross-examination, my father's attorney tried to discredit my uncle's testimony. Mr. Terrence, isn't it true that you're currently facing your own financial difficulties? That you filed for bankruptcy 8 months ago? Yes. And isn't it also true that your niece has promised to compensate you for your testimony today? No, that's a lie. But you do expect to benefit from this case, don't you? Perhaps a portion of the property value if it's awarded to Ms. Delilah. My uncle leaned forward. I'm dying. I'll be dead in 6 months, maybe less. The only thing I expect is to leave this world knowing I finally did the right thing. The attorney had no response to that. Next came the forensic accountant Vivian had hired, a meticulous woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, who walked the judge through 15 years of financial records. She'd traced every dollar of my grandmother's trust fund, the Porsche, a timeshare in Cabo, Griffin's wedding, renovations on the house that legally belonged to me. The defendants used Ms. Delilah's inheritance as a personal slush fund, she testified. And when that ran out, they created a fraudulent mortgage crisis to extract an additional $108,000 directly from the victim. When it was my turn to testify, my hands were shaking. I'd spent the previous night rehearsing with Vivian, but standing in that courtroom, facing my parents, felt surreal. Vivian started with the basics. My age, my employment history, my relationship with my parents. Then she asked about the first time they'd asked me for money. I described being 17, handing over my paycheck for Mom's surgery. And did you later discover that surgery never happened? Yes. My mother told me during an argument that she'd been surprised how easily I'd believed it. Mom's attorney objected. Hearsay. The judge overruled it. We went through each incident, every loan, every crisis. Every time I'd sacrificed my own well-being because I thought I was saving my family. When Vivian showed the video of my deed burning, I watched my father's face carefully. He showed no remorse, just anger that he'd been caught. And what was your emotional state when you saw this video? Vivian asked. I felt like I'd been punched. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd given up, it was all for nothing. They'd never intended to honor our agreement. During cross-examination, their attorney tried to paint me as a bitter daughter seeking revenge. Isn't it true that you and your father had disagreements about your career choices? No. Didn't he encourage you to pursue a law degree, and you refused? He suggested I become a lawyer so I could work for free for his business. I declined. And isn't this whole case just retaliation for that rejection? I looked at the attorney steadily. This case is about recovering $448,000 that was stolen from me. If you want to call seeking justice retaliation, that says more about you than it does about me. The judge hid a smile. When Detective Chen took the stand, he revealed the extent of my father's fraudulent schemes, the investment scams, the forged documents. 3 other elderly victims who'd been convinced to invest in guaranteed opportunities that never materialized. In total, we believe Mr. Howard has defrauded at least 17 victims over 12 years, Chen testified. The amount exceeds $2 million. My mother had stopped crying. She sat frozen, staring at the table. The hearing lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the judge didn't hesitate. I find probable cause to believe that the defendants engaged in a coordinated scheme to defraud Ms. Delilah, beginning with the forgery of her grandmother's will and continuing through systematic financial exploitation. The matter will proceed to trial. She paused. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Criminal Division for prosecution. Bail is set at $150,000 each for Mr. and Mrs. Howard. My parents couldn't make bail. Griffin had to choose between bailing out his parents or keeping his own assets protected. He chose himself. They spent the next 3 weeks in county jail. The civil trial began on a cold Monday in November. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters. Detective Chen's investigation had leaked to the press, and suddenly my family's fraud was regional news. Local businessman accused of bilking elderly victims, read one headline. Daughter fights back against family con artists, read another. I'd received messages from 7 of my father's other victims. They wanted to testify. They wanted their stories heard. Vivian selected 3 whose cases most clearly demonstrated the pattern of fraud. The first was an 83-year-old man named Mr. Kowalski who'd invested $43,000 with my father's company 10 years ago. He told me it was a guaranteed return, Mr. Kowalski testified, his voice shaking. He showed me documents, certificates. He said his own mother had invested and made 20% the first year. And did you ever see any returns on your investment? Nothing. When I asked about it, he said the market had shifted, that I should leave the money in longer. After 5 years, I just gave up. I thought I'd made a bad decision. Did you know that the certificates he showed you were forged? Not until the detective called me. The second victim was a Vietnamese woman named Mrs. Nguyen, who'd given my father $67,000 to invest in real estate development. My English is not perfect, she said through a translator. He said I could trust him because he was a respected businessman, that his family had lived here for generations. And what happened to your investment? Nothing, no property, no returns. He stopped answering my calls. The third victim made me cry. She was a widow named Geneva Thompson who'd been my grandmother's best friend. She'd invested $89,000, her entire life savings, based on my father's promise that he was continuing my grandmother's investment strategy. Your grandmother was a smart woman, Geneva testified. I thought if she trusted her son, I could too. I was wrong. When the prosecution played the recording of my father bragging about keeping Delilah in line, the jury looked disgusted. When they showed the video of my deed burning, 2 jurors looked physically ill. My father's defense was predictable. He claimed everything was a misunderstanding, that he'd been acting in good faith, that the will forgery was actually his mother's wishes communicated verbally before she died, that the investment losses were legitimate business failures. But then Vivian played her trump card. She called Griffin to the stand as a hostile witness. Mr. Griffin, you received the video of your father burning your sister's deed, correct? Yes. And you sent it to her with the message, "Thanks for the house, sis. Dad's putting it in my name tomorrow, correct?" Yes. Why did you send that message? Griffin shifted uncomfortably. I was angry. She'd been threatening to sue. Threatening to sue over what? The house. The house that she'd paid $108,000 to save from foreclosure? She didn't pay for the house. She gave our parents money to help with the mortgage. But there was no foreclosure, was there, Mr. Griffin? Silence. Your father had refinanced the property and taken out $200,000 in equity. You knew that, didn't you? I don't know anything about that. Vivian pulled out a document. This is a group text thread between you, your father, and your mother from 14 months ago. Your father wrote, "Just pulled out $200K from the refinance. Griffin, your cut is $50K for keeping Delilah convinced the house is in trouble." You responded, "Perfect. Should last me until the deed transfer." You knew the foreclosure was fake. You participated in the fraud. Griffin's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the text messages. When my mother took the stand, she tried the sympathy approach. She talked about how hard marriage was, how my father controlled the finances, how she'd been a victim too. "But you witnessed the forged will, Mrs. Howard," Vivian said. "Your signature is on the document. I thought it was legitimate. My husband said it was what his mother wanted. Even though you'd been present when your mother-in-law had the original will prepared, you attended that meeting according to the attorney's records?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember attending a will signing where your mother-in-law specifically stated that the house should go to Delilah? It was a long time ago, 15 years. Not that long, Mrs. Howard. And you don't remember the woman who raised your husband saying directly that she wanted her granddaughter to have the house because Delilah has always carried my spirit of independence?" My mother started crying again. "I'm not a bad person. We needed the money. For what? Your husband was earning $200,000 a year from his business. You had no debt besides the mortgage. What did you need $340,000 from your daughter's trust fund for? We had expenses, like your husband's Porsche, the timeshare in Cabo, your son's wedding." The crying intensified, but Vivian didn't let up. "You made a choice, Mrs. Howard. You chose to steal from your daughter. You chose to watch her work herself to exhaustion, believing she was saving your home when you were actually living in her property. You chose to burn the deed to property she'd paid for. Those were choices, not mistakes." When my father testified, he was arrogant. He seemed to believe his charm would win the jury over. He talked about how hard he'd worked to build his business, how much pressure he was under, how children were supposed to help their parents. "My daughter seems to think that because I made some financial decisions she didn't understand, she's entitled to punish the entire family," he said. "Some financial decisions?" Vivian repeated. "You forged your mother's will. You stole your daughter's inheritance. You created a fake foreclosure to extract more money. Those aren't financial decisions, those are crimes. That's your interpretation. It's also the interpretation of the forensic accountant, the detective investigating your case, and 17 other victims you've defrauded over 12 years. Alleged victims, 7 of whom are suing you in separate civil cases that will proceed after this trial." My father's composure finally cracked. "My daughter is destroying this family over money. That's all this is about." "No," Vivian said quietly. "This is about a young woman who gave everything to her family and was betrayed at every turn. This is about 15 years of exploitation. This is about justice." The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, theft, breach of fiduciary duty. The total damages, $448,000 in direct theft, plus $300,000 in punitive damages. My father's face went white. My mother collapsed into her attorney's arms. Griffin stormed out of the courtroom, but the civil case was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, the criminal trial began. This time, the stakes were higher. My father faced up to 20 years in prison. My mother faced 15. The prosecution added witness tampering charges after they discovered my father had tried to pay off Mr. Kowalski to change his testimony. I attended every day of the trial. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know that I wasn't the frightened 17-year-old girl who'd handed over her first paycheck anymore. The criminal trial was faster. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the forged will, the financial records, the victim testimonies, the video of my deed burning. They played the recording of my father's post-conviction phone call where he'd threatened me. "If you testify against me, you'll regret it," he'd said. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you are." The jury found them both guilty in under 2 hours. At sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. I went first. "For 15 years, I believed that family meant sacrifice," I said. "I worked multiple jobs. I gave up dating, friendships, opportunities. I canceled dreams because my family needed me. Or so I thought. I looked directly at my parents. But you never needed me. You just needed my money. You saw me as a resource to exploit, not a daughter to love. And when I had nothing left to give, you tried to steal the one thing I'd earned through my sacrifice, my property." My father wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't hate you," I continued. "I pity you. Because you had a daughter who would have done anything for you, and you turned her into an adversary. You had a family, and you destroyed it for money. I hope that in prison, you have time to reflect on what you've lost." "Because I'm done grieving for you," Mr. Kowalski spoke next. Then Mrs. Nguyen, then Geneva Thompson, 7 victims in total, each describing how my father had betrayed their trust. When it was my father's turn to speak, he stood and faced the judge. "I'm sorry," he said, but he was looking at the judge, not at any of his victims, not at me. The judge wasn't impressed. "Mr. Howard, you've shown a pattern of predatory behavior spanning more than a decade. You've targeted the vulnerable, exploited your family, and shown no genuine remorse. The court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison." My mother received 8 years. Griffin, who'd taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony about his parents' other schemes, received 5 years probation and was ordered to pay restitution. The house was officially transferred to my name 3 months later. I stood in the doorway of the property I'd unknowingly owned for 15 years, keys in my hand. It felt empty, not just because my parents were gone, they'd been evicted when they couldn't make bail, but because it held so many memories of manipulation. Every room reminded me of a lie. The kitchen where mom had cried about medical bills, the den where dad had shown me the foreclosure notice, the fireplace where they'd burned my deed. I hired a real estate agent and listed it the same day. It sold in 2 weeks for $890,000. After paying off the remaining legitimate mortgage and covering legal fees, I walked away with $623,000. Not as much as the $748,000 they'd stolen from me over the years, but enough to finally start living my own life. I paid off my student loans first. Then I bought a small condo downtown with a view of the river. I furnished it with secondhand finds and art from local students. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Really mine. No one could take it from me. My uncle died 6 weeks after the criminal trial ended. He'd held on just long enough to see my parents convicted. At his funeral, I was the only family member who attended. He'd left me a letter, written in shaky handwriting during his final days. "Delilah," it read. "I'm sorry it took me dying to find the courage to do the right thing. You deserved better from all of us. Your grandmother would be proud of the woman you've become. Use your inheritance to build the life she wanted for you. The life you always deserved. Love, Uncle Terrence." I had his letter framed. It hangs in my home office next to my law school acceptance letter. Yes, law school. Turns out I am interested in becoming an attorney, just not the kind who works for free for fraudulent family businesses. I'm specializing in elder law and financial abuse. I want to help people like Mr. Kowalski and Mrs. Nguyen who get taken advantage of by people they trust. I'm also working with a victims advocacy group to help other people who've been financially exploited by family members. It's more common than people think. Adult children draining elderly parents' accounts, siblings stealing inheritances, parents treating their kids like piggy banks. Everyone has a story about money and family, and most of those stories are painful. The strangest part of all this is the forgiveness. Not for my parents. They're still in prison, and I haven't visited once. But for myself. I spent years blaming myself for being stupid enough to fall for their lies, for not getting things in writing, for trusting blindly. But I've come to realize that trust isn't stupidity, it's hope. And hope is what makes us human. My parents betrayed that hope. They weaponized my love. But that doesn't mean I was wrong to love them. It means they were wrong to abuse that love. I started dating again. His name is Vincent, and he's a high school math teacher who's never asked me for money. On our 3rd date, I told him everything, the whole sordid story. I expected him to run. Instead, he said, "That explains why you counted out exact change for your half of the dinner bill on our 1st date." We laughed about it. The fact that I could laugh felt like healing. Griffin reached out 6 months after his probation started. He sent an email asking if we could meet. I deleted it. He sent another, and another. Finally, I responded with a single line. "You made your choice when you sent me that video. Live with it." He showed up at my condo building last month. The doorman called to ask if I wanted to see him. I said no. Griffin stood outside for 20 minutes before finally leaving. I watched from my window, feeling nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just emptiness where family used to be. A few weeks ago, I got a letter from my mother. It was 5 pages long, handwritten on prison stationery. She apologized. Said she'd been in therapy, that she'd realized how much damage she'd caused, that she hoped someday I could forgive her. I read it once. Then I put it in a folder with all the other legal documents from the case. Not because I might forgive her someday, but but because I wanted a record, evidence that she was capable of acknowledgement, even if that acknowledgement came too late. I don't know if I'll ever respond. Some people believe family is everything, that blood matters most, that you should forgive because they're your parents. I used to believe that too. Now I believe that family is what you build, not what you're born into. It's the people who show up when things are hard, who celebrate your victories without jealousy, who would never dream of exploiting your love for personal gain. Vincent is family. My advocacy group colleagues are family. The owner of the coffee shop near my condo who saves me a table during finals week is family. These are the people who've earned my trust. My biological family? They're just people I used to know. People who taught me what I didn't want to become. I'm 33 now. I live in a condo I own. I'm in my second year of law school, top of my class. I have $485,000 in savings that no one else can touch. I have a boyfriend who thinks I'm brilliant and never makes me feel like I owe him anything. I have a future that's entirely my own. And every morning I wake up in my own space, free from obligation and manipulation, and I think about that video. My brother's smug face, my father's smile, the deed curling into ash. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd accept my role as the family ATM forever. They were wrong. The deed they burned was just paper. But what I built from those ashes, my independence, my education, my future, that can never be taken from me. My father calls sometimes. Prison allows inmates one 15-minute call per week. I never answer. He leaves voicemails asking me to visit, to write, to put money on his commissary account. The irony isn't lost on me. After 15 years of me giving him everything, now he has nothing, and he's asking me for help. I save the voicemails. Not because I'll ever respond, but because they remind me of something important. I'm not responsible for fixing other people's consequences. Not anymore. Last week, I got a call from one of my father's victims. She'd heard about my advocacy work and wanted to volunteer. We met for coffee, and she told me that watching me fight back had given her courage to report her own family's financial abuse. "You showed me it was possible to say no," she said, "to choose yourself." That's when I realized what I'd really gained from this nightmare. Not just money or property or justice. Freedom. The freedom to choose who gets access to my time, my resources, my love. The freedom to build boundaries without guilt. The freedom to walk away from toxicity, even when it wears the mask of family. My parents gave me life, but they also taught me that life isn't enough, not when it comes with chains. So I broke those chains. I burned them down the same way they burned my deed. And from those ashes, I built something they never expected. A future where I matter more than their greed. A life where I'm not a resource to be extracted, but a person to be respected. A family, a real family, built on trust instead of exploitation. They thought they could erase my future. Instead, I erased theirs. And I've never been happier. 3 years have passed since the trials ended. My parents are still in prison. Griffin moved to another state, trying to escape the stigma of being related to convicted fraudsters. I finished law school and passed the bar on my first attempt. Last month, I argued my first case. A daughter whose father had drained her college fund to pay for his gambling debts. I won. The judge ordered full restitution plus damages. After the hearing, my client hugged me and cried. "How did you learn to be so strong?" she asked. I thought about the 17-year-old girl who'd handed over her first paycheck, the young woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion, the daughter who'd believed that love meant sacrifice without limits. "I learned from people who showed me what not to do," I said, and then I chose to do better. That night, Vincent and I celebrated with takeout in my condo. As we ate, I looked around at the life I'd built, the art on my walls that I'd chosen, the furniture I'd paid for without going into debt, the degree on my wall that no one could take away. "You're smiling," Vincent said. "I'm happy," I replied, and I meant it. Because the thing about burning down your life is that sometimes it's the only way to clear space for something better. My parents tried to erase my future. Instead, they gave me the push I needed to build one that was truly mine. And for that, though they'll never know it, I'm almost grateful. Not because I forgive them, but because I finally forgave myself.